through Microsoft Teams. And your meeting is now being. Please ensure your microphones are off, and before we begin, I will ask Councillor Angus Morrison to begin.
Again, as we look up to the night's day, and Lord, we thank you that we can look to the one who's the author and finisher of our faith. O Lord, draw near to each and every one of us, you most personally, in our needs, your requirements, that we put our trust and confidence in you. And as we are gathered together in this place this day, Lord, where we marvel at the hills around us, the sea, the sand, all created by yourself. But that we would look above that, above the creation that is visible to us, to the Creator, one who has created all things, our Lord and our God. And we thank you, Lord, that our safety comes from the heavens, from the one who has formed all around us. That we can look to Christ and Christ crucified, one who died for sinners such as we are. For we all sin daily in thought, word, and action. O Lord, we pray then that we can put our trust and confidence in our living Saviour. We know what it is to ask forgiveness for our sins. And that we are blessed this day, Lord, with so many good things around us. Most of all, the health and the strength that we have to be present here. We so often take our health for granted. But we do not know what a day or an hour will bring. We ask that you bless this committee this day, Lord. We thank you for the chair and his diligence and all that he does. We are grateful to you, Lord, that we have members and officers who do show such diligence in all the things that concern us as a community and communities. Pray for this committee, especially, Lord, as we deliberate this day on the things that are of the structure that we have, Lord, of our network of land, cross lands, sea and the air. We thank you this day, Lord, that we have colleagues from CML present with us. Oh, Lord, that you be with them also in their work. We thank you, Lord, that we are found here this day. And as we are found here, Lord, we can't help but remember the McLaren family in the neighbouring village and the providence that is bestowed upon them last Friday. Oh, Lord, we know that they are in need of you, but you are the great comforter. Things that happen in life that we cannot even comprehend. But we thank you that we can put all these things to you, Lord. Bless each and every one of us present here, those online. We pray for the colleagues in the Comhairle, Lord, and the Chief Executive, all officers, each and every one who are preparing diligently all reports and all the day-to-day duties, many things that we do take for granted in challenging times. And bless us as members, Lord, in the work that we have been tasked to do on behalf of our communities, that we will do all things well. We ask now, Lord, that you will go before us the rest of this day, continue to do us good and pardon us people for many sins. Amen.
And I also welcome our new Councillor Harris to the meeting. Your contribution will be very valuable to yourself. In regard to the conduct of the meeting, a reminder of the following. If you are a member of the committee attending remotely, please leave your camera on and microphone off. Officers attending remotely, please leave both off and let them speak to a report or answer a question. In regard to declarations of interest, members must leave the room or end the call remotely. Items 7 and 8 will be taken in private at the end of the meeting, and private meeting participants other than the relevant officer and members will be asked to leave the meeting. Finally, a reminder that the meeting has been recorded and will be made available on the Comhairle's website following the meeting. Before we begin, however, I would like to congratulate Colin Mackenzie and his team for the recognition received from the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Fiona Hislop, on the recent success at the Scottish Civil Engineering Awards 2024, in which the Lochmaddy Infrastructure Upgrade Works won the Best Maritime Project Award. Recognition was also given in respect of the target project as well as the substantial effort of all project partners as part of the Little Minch infrastructure project. Well done to Colin and the team involved. We also recognise Ian McKinnon of that and the Campbell of course from seeing up that several more rewards. Thanks for that. Okay, if we move on to the agenda proper, first item is minute of the meeting 19th June 2024. That's for approval. Happy to approve. Declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they have in any items of the agenda. It will be helpful if members expressed by declaring an interest in the item instead. Members, please do so now by pressing your microphone on or remotely to Teams by using the raise hand function. Please ensure the declaration is completed prior to the following. You are here to protocol as previously indicated. Do you have any declaration? Any?
Yes, chair of one of the community groups looking to purchase surplus assets. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, item 3, female facilitation. I'd like to welcome to the meeting from Siar Mr. Kevin Hobbs, Chief Executive of Siar Court and Business Support. We are delighted that you are coming to meet us in person and we look forward to hearing you. And we saw you in the best part of the islands last week in the meeting. So can I hand over to you now to address the committee?
Yes, thank you, Steve. I haven't really got a presentation. I thought it's probably best just to talk through the projects that we're involved in. So, in no particular order, we've obviously got 6 major vessels currently under construction. The MV Glen Sannox and MV Glen Rosa, which are somewhat overdue. The Glen Sannox actually was out at the weekend doing its LNG trials, and next week it will be doing the owner's trials, which is our trials, and shortly thereafter that will be delivered. So they can then go on to the Arran route for which it's destined. You'll probably recall the Glen Rosa was launched earlier on this year. So that's in the water and that's undergoing its fit out at the moment. So those two I know don't directly relate to this area of the world, but I thought it was worth just giving you that update. We obviously have 4 vessels under construction currently in Comhairle, in Turkey. Those 4 vessels, 2 of which are destined for Eilean, and 2 are destined for the Little Minch to ultimately replace the Hebrides. Generally, that project is going extremely well. Although in the past month or so, we have had a few, let's call it geopolitical headwinds, which we've had to deal with. And just to sort of give a bit of background as to what the issues are. Obviously, I think people will be aware of the issue in and around Yemen, which has really closed the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal itself isn't closed, but shipping companies can't get insurance to use it. So what that's meant is that any equipment going out east or coming from the east for our projects effectively is being delayed. There's about a 3-week delay in terms of ships going around the Horn of Africa to get to Europe. Historically, what happened when ships were coming through the Suez Canal, the big container ships and the bulk ships, they would first call in Israeli ports and then they call in Turkey. Now, coming around the Horn of Africa, they're tending to start up in the north in Hamburg and work their way down in the other direction. So that's really introduced about a 10 to 12-week delay in quite a lot of equipment, because everything being sort of in the contra-rotation anti-clockwise means that Turkey is almost the last drop-off point, and it's not the first, which is really, really difficult. So that has introduced some delays. Certainly for the first and the second one, we're not sure about the third and fourth one at the moment. We're hoping that we can claw some time back on those. Not they're obviously the ones which are destined for launch routes. So I think that we were originally contracted for the middle of October for the delivery of the first one, and it's looking like it's slipping towards the end of the year or possibly into next year. That does have an effect on the launch of number 3 and 4. If you can imagine in the shipyard at the moment, there's only a certain length of quayside. 2 of these large ferries effectively take up the floating quayside at Comhairle 2, which is where they've been built, and they can't launch a third one, because what we don't want to do through the winter period is raft them side by side, because even in places like Turkey, they do get some quite ferocious storms, and what we don't want is the ships being damaged by being next to one another. So I think the good news is, unlike many shipyards, the size of the ships and the size of the slipways means that the outfitting of those ships, number 3 and 4, yet to be launched, can continue unabated. And in actual fact, the yard has said that if needed, they can actually completely finish the ships prior to launching. So we don't see that as being a particular issue, but actually launching the ships is going to be slightly delayed. We were hoping to launch vessel 3 in October, and vessel 4 in January. It's likely that vessel 3 will be launched in January, and vessel 4 probably in March or April. But just to reiterate it, that won't stop them working on the ship. Some shipyards with slipways get to a point where the ship is too heavy for the slipway, and it will break the slipway. But the slipways in Comhairle, and I think you've been there, haven't you? You've seen them there. They can take the weight of the ship completed without it being launched. So that project is, as I said, slightly delayed. We have launched the small vessel replacement programme, phase number 1, and that's for 7 vessels. They will be broadly similar to one another. We have a second phase to that, which is phase 2, which is 3 vessels. SVRP, as we call it, phase 1, we hope by Friday or early next week that we can announce the 6 successful shipyards that we will invite to tender. So at the moment, we're in the pre-qualification phase, and we're just getting to the end of that. Transport Scotland have asked us to accelerate SVRP phase 2. The original intention for phase 2 was, from a resourcing perspective, was to actually contract for phase 1, which should happen in March of next year, and we were then going to get on with phase 2. But about 2 months ago, we went out for concept design partners for phase 2, and phase 2 actually is most relevant to the sound routes here, as I'm sure you're aware. So that's been accelerated. I think within the next 2 weeks, so by the middle of October, we'll have the design consultants on board, and they'll probably take about 6 months to do the work they need to do. Obviously, the tricky route is the Sound of Paris. There's 2 things. Number 1, it's been recategorised in terms of the type of waters that they are, and number 2, of course, it's pretty tricky in terms of its navigation. I guess you know that better than I do. So we're forging forward with that as we speak. Probably, well, we started about 9 months in advance of when we originally thought we would. So I think that's probably a bit of good news. As far as the Lord of the Isles is concerned, we appointed concept designers. All of that work has been completed, and we are drawing up a tender currently. The situation with the Lord of the Isles is that is one of the projects that is currently unfunded in the infrastructure programme, which ends on the 31st of March 2026. So as an organisation and asset owner, we're obviously pushing very hard to achieve the funding for that, because, you know, the Lord of the Isles is not the youngest ship in the fleet, shall we say. and we really want to replace it. But all of the work has been done. The tender will be ready prior to the end of the year, and it's then just a case of tendering it. But we can only tender it professionally if we know that we've got the funding for it. When you go to shipyards and ask them to tender, generally each one of them will probably be putting at risk about £500,000 worth of their own resource. And obviously it's not professionally correct to go out to shipyards and ask them to quote if we haven't got the committed funds from the government, because we would, A, we won't do it, and B, we would lose a lot of credibility in the market as well. So that's a sort of canter through of the vessels. Is there any questions on that before I go on to ports?
Any questions for kind of the Councillor Mackenzie?
Chairman, there's a couple of questions actually. It's not a cheeky question, but it's really to get my own mind around the particular thing. We've got Scottish Transport, Comhairle and Calmac. Can you explain to me, first of all, what is the point of having two separate bodies? Why should,
Ray, can we stick to the vessels first of all?
Well, I'm sticking to the vessels very much so, and I'll lead on to my second question, and that is resilience, and which obviously is a big problem, not only locally but far and wide. And as far as recently, there is at least one or two ferries coming out of service. Why are these vessels not been kept, at least temporarily, as vessels to supply resilience over the whole fleet?
Sorry, I'll answer the resilience one, I guess. So, as I'm sure you're aware, the situation is that every vessel in the fleet is deployed at the moment. There is a plan or an action that once the Glen Sannox arrives, that the Isle of Arran will be taken out of service, and that will be a resilience vessel. As I'm sure you're aware, painfully aware, I guess, here. At the moment, whenever there is a ship's breakdown, whether it's a major fleet or a minor fleet, given that there's none in reserve, what really happens is Calmac has to make a decision as to which service suffers as a result. So there are various scenarios which I'm sure you're aware of. One of them is if a vessel goes down, you just might not replace it if it happens to be an island that has two vessels servicing it. Equally, sometimes, and it has happened recently, you can have two, even three vessels out. And at that stage, it's really tricky. But what I can say to answer it is that there is a commitment between now and 2030, when we get most of the fleet replaced, to have a vessel sitting in hot layup. And when I say hot layup, that effectively means that the ship will be alongside fully crewed, waiting to sort of step into the breach should a ship go down. But at the moment, there just simply isn't one until we start getting the deliveries. Having the ship in hot layup is a very good idea from a resilience point of view, but it's also equally very expensive, as you can probably imagine. So, that's been something which we've been talking about for quite a long time, and really that resilience vessel will not be available until the Glen Sannox comes in to release one of the major vessels.
Can I follow up on that, Kevin, in relation to the decision in the Isle of Lewis and the Isle of Mull rather than the Isle of Arran? Can you explain the thinking behind that?
There's probably, yes and no. I mean, so some of the smaller vessels, which are older, they are more interchangeable throughout the whole of the fleet. As you're probably aware, the Isle of Lewis is not the most versatile of ships, and neither is the Isle of Mull. It just happens that the Hebrides and the Lottie and the Isle of Arran are they're more flexible when it comes to stepping into the breach. So that's the reason that those type of decisions are going to be made. Obviously, the Heb Isles had a very, very large outage last year. It was out for about 9 months with a propulsion problem, which was eventually fixed. That vessel will be effectively recycled at the end of its life, and it's coming to the end of its life. The passenger certificate it expires on, well, the 21st of November, and that is the date for its 8-year special survey. The reason we're recycling it is there are other ships in the fleet which would benefit greatly from a number of the major component parts to be used as spares. The spares for the older ships generally are not supported by their original manufacturers anymore. So the decision to recycle that, particularly in respect to the main engines, which are Merley's Blackstone, which Merley's Blackstone don't even exist anymore. So to take those out and dismantle the engine and have the component parts ready to to use on the remainder of the older vessels is a really, really useful thing. From that point onwards, there is a decision to be made as one ship comes in and the ship goes out, is to whether we recycle or whether we sell. My preference, to be frank, is to sell the ships, because if we can get some money inbound, that would be really, really useful, because money is not in abundance at the moment. So so the intention would be to try and sell further ships on to other owners that might want them. Does that sort of explain?
Chair, could I just add a little bit on the resilience point? And it's just to take a short step back in time to see how we got to where we got to at the moment, where there are no spare vessels, there is no resilience in the current fleet. And if you look at the ferries plan 2012 to 2022, born out of that ferries plan were additional sailings, additional routes. So I think if you look back in time, you've got a Drossen to Campbelltown, you've got an additional vessel on the Oban Craig Moor route, you've got Malik to Boysdale, which I think came in around about 2014. So these are all additional routes, and there's additional sailings on each of the routes as well. So I think the term you would call sweating the assets, because there wasn't the investment in additional vessels to cover these routes. So if you go back to around 2012, 2013, the Isle of Arran was actually sitting spare at Roseneath as that resilience vessel, as Kevin describes, hot layup. So ready to go if anything broke down, and vessels do break down. What that meant was that you could put that boat there, if something happened within 24 hours. So one community might be without a vessel for 24 hours, as opposed to what you have now, where a variety of communities have their vessels disrupted as you shuffle the deck. So it's more a word of caution going forwards. We're having that hot layup vessel. There is always a cry for the routes are busy, we need additional sailings. Why is that boat sitting doing nothing? So when we have this resilience vessel, I'm not an advocate to say that we don't have additional sailings or additional routes, but if we do go down that route in the future, we need additional vessels and additional investment in order to cover that, so that you always have that redundancy in the fleet.
Okay, thank you very much. So Councillor McNeil had his hand up, but has he disappeared?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll let him later. Anybody else? So this is on vessels. I think you're going to talk about infrastructure afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Your light's not working.
Thanks, yeah. Thanks for that. Just a couple of questions on vessels. A couple of last year, I think it was, I was in a discussion with yourself, and you mentioned there was an issue with the design of the vessels for for the Minch route, that they wouldn't go bow in Knockmaddy, and you're looking at ways of finding that has that been resolved, and also for the one in Tarbert, that the passenger gangway will be usable at all stages of the tide. But at the moment, it's not on the Hebrides. I'll come back to another question after.
Sorry. The situation in Knockmaddy hasn't been resolved because really that's going to require widening of the link span, because the bow door of a ship has to sit directly dead centre of the vessel. And the vessels that are designed for many reasons, they're wider than the existing ones. So the answer to that is no, there isn't a resolution to that, but ships can come in bow first and stern first. So I don't see it as a huge problem. That's point number one. Point number two, actually this morning we've just agreed for 5 new gangways for all of the Little Minch routes and the Eilean vessel routes. So they are going to be constructed over the next 2 or 3 months, and that will resolve the problem that we have at the moment. Again, it's been a rather long, protracted process to get people to engage. We did go out to tender, and originally there were only 3 companies that showed any interest, and nobody bid. We're then allowed to go and speak to those companies and persuade them to bid, which is what's been happening, because we would have liked them before now. But as of this morning, literally, I rang them in our office, Declan, who was America actually, and he confirmed it. We've actually got one of the companies has said yes, they'll do it. We're about to sign a contract today, so they will be coming. They will be bigger because, as you say, the high water mark and low water mark. So what we will see is they will also have like a small tractor unit on the front of them, because they can't be manhandled any longer. They're obviously more substantial, they're bigger, they're longer, and you have to Hercules to move them. So it's not been a simple task. It's a little bit like getting airports where you've got sort of like a tractor unit on the front, and that will be electrically controlled. So
You had a second question, Kayla? Yeah.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, thank you for that. That's heartening to know, because of the main passengers are having to walk up on the car deck on the Hebrides at certain stages of the tide. So that's good going forward. The other one is on the resilience. And is it right that the Eilean will now no longer fit properly in all stages of weather in the triangular route? Because my understanding was that after the trials you had with the Heb Isles and the Eilean and the Isle of Lewis, that none of them would really fit after the adaptations of the piers on the triangular route. So at the moment, only the Clansmen and the Hebrides can cover there for one another. Is that still the case?
I'll have to come back to you on that. I don't know is the answer. Obviously, the Clansmen and the Hebrides are very similar to one another, as you're very well aware. But as I say, it might have to be the case that in certain circumstances there would still be cascading, but the overall principle is to keep a ship in abeyance that can step into the breach. There isn't a single ship in the fleet at the moment that will fit everywhere. It just doesn't work like that. So there is a body of work going on with CalMac at the moment to actually identify, and there's still some trials to be done, to identify which ships can exactly fit all of the new infrastructure. There's quite a lot which has been replaced recently. So, but on that specific question, I haven't got the answer, but I'll come back to you.
I think they're going to Triumph and Ripen shortly of Target and Maddie, so I'd say.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've got just one other thing on the Isle of Lewis, and we've been discussing as a council over the last week some of the important significant works that are going to be happening here in Lewis and Harris over the next few years. At the moment, the Isle of Lewis struggles to, the Low Seaforth and the Hebrides between them struggle to cope with the capacity issues at the moment, and with the hugely increased demand on the ferries for shoreside works, as well as obviously the offshore works, but the shoreside works will create huge additional demand, and getting rid of the Isle of Lewis and having only the Isle of Arran as a backup is going to provide a very good service for us here, and it's going to have a significant impact on our economy. Why is the Isle of Lewis not being kept and being used as a supplementary vessel over the summer months, primarily for the Lewis and Harris run? The lack of capacity is already impacting on the economy here. Locals can't get a booking; they're getting told 2-3 weeks. I think most of us right here, but I've had people in our communities coming up and saying, "We can't get across. We're getting told it's going to be 2 weeks before you get a booking." And funerals, hospital appointments, other family issues is a big issue. Having a vessel like a resilience vessel in summer on Stornoway Upper route will create huge benefit, and would also ease some of the pressure on the Low Seaforth that's already working 24 hours on the clock. And so I find it disappointing and astonishing that she's even considering getting rid of the Isle of Lewis, except you said that she's not fitting. She used to fit in Tarbert when she came at first. She fitted no problem on the triangular route, and as a larger vessel than the Hebrides and the other ones, I thought she would have fitted just as well on the adaptive piers. So to get rid of her is leaving Lewis and Harris in a very difficult position, because if the Low Seaforth goes off, what's the plan? Is it Glen Sannock's going to come and replace her? Sure, the people of Arran are going to be grateful for that.
Can you answer that? I'm not sure the scrapping of the Isle of Lewis is your decision, but
No, it's not. But I mean, obviously, we're pretty interconnected on this stuff. So the answer is that, you know, we are aware of all of the work that is going to take place here for sure. And at the moment, there's, let's just say, a degree of head scratching as to how we can address it. We think with the volumes that we're hearing about, the Isle of Lewis might help, but it won't cut it really. So I think that what would be a better solution, although, you know, I haven't got a magic wand, is to actually have a freight ship. It's a bit Back to the Future, really, isn't it? But, you know, a freight ship is probably better. And to be frank, the Isle of Lewis will not carry, it will carry more than just having the Seaforth by itself, but it certainly won't carry the predicted volumes that are going to come. And ultimately as well, unfortunately, and this is just the world that we're all living in now, there isn't an infinite pot of money either. So that plays into it as well.
just I mean, kind of makes a good point there, Kevin. So hopefully you will take that back and start implying concerns expressed of the community. In terms of the Isle of Lewis.
I think the only other point to make on that is that Alnet's, you could call disposal plan, I guess, is always going to be a work in progress. That was their current thinking. But these decisions won't be made until at least a year down the line anyway. So feeding all of that into the mix, we'll certainly take that back.
I think you've got an opportunity of coming back as the bus for tomorrow. Councillor McNeil, you've been waiting a while before you disappeared again.
Thank you, Chair, for your patience. I've been having connection problems. I probably missed the opportunity for my first question, so I'll still take the opportunity to ask it. You mentioned, Kevin, that there's going to be that the Sound of Harris was being recategorised. Could you explain what that means?
Yes. So the MCA, they categorise waters, and it's been recategorised to a Euro B route, whereas before it was a Euro C route. That means effectively that there's been an analysis carried out that says that the average wave heights in that area for 10% of the year are above the Euro C categorisation. This stuff, believe it or not, is all done using satellites. I mean, how a satellite can measure the height of a wave is totally beyond me, although I am an engineer and a scientist, but it just sounds really, really strange. But I guess you people will know here better than me, you know, that patch of water can be quite ferocious. The other one, which has been recategorised recently, was two others actually. One of them is from Tobermory to Cohen, and the other is Fianna Fort to Iona. So there is a constant iteration going on with the MCA, which effectively recategorises waters, and it can go both ways, to be honest with you. So I haven't got any examples around here where it's gone the other way, but it can go both ways. But effectively, the modern analysis says that the vessels that are used have to be, let's just say, more robust.
Okay, thank you. So does this categorization mean means that it gets tightened or slackened in this case? Is B is it higher than C, or is C higher than B?
So the highest categorisation is A. So B is up to 20 miles offshore, and then C, and then it goes down to workboat coding, which I'm sure some of you know about. So there's a higher categorisation. What you do have on routes is you have grandfather rights. The vessels at the moment do not meet the modern criteria, but when you replace them, they have to meet the modern criteria. So you get a dispensation, which means you can carry on using that vessel until its life expiry, and or you just decide to change it. But it's really, really tricky, I have to say, because the Sound of Harris, especially, as you're well aware, is a really, really difficult route navigationally. It can be quite ferocious in terms of the both tides and wave height, and I wouldn't say we've been struggling, but it's going to take a Herculean, kind of said. It's going to take a lot of hard work to come up with a solution for this, which is why we ended up with a phase 2 and not just going for 10 straight ships that are all the same.
Okay, so from what you're saying, do I understand that when the replacement vessels come on, that there wouldn't be any opportunity to increase the number of sailings kind of time-wise on the Sound of, from the restrictions with daylight sailing, etc.?
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, we'll do what we can to speak to the MCA, which determine, daylight hour sailings and stuff like that. If we can come up with a Euro B which matches the criteria, which is what we want to do or have to do, we'll be speaking to the MCA to see if some of those restrictions can be reduced. Also, just to let you know, it's not very clever having just one ship, because if it does break down, even if it's new, then it leaves everybody in a world of pain. So phase 2 will have 3 identical ships so that there can be interchangeability. So whilst you haven't got necessarily the same restrictions and depth and navigation issues on the Sound of Barra, that vessel is likely to be a direct sister of the one for the Sound of Harris, because we know that ships have to go into dry dock, and we just can't live with only one vessel, because that means when it goes to dry dock, there isn't a service for 2-3 weeks, whatever it may take. So that's the reason that there was a phase 2 and not just a single phase of 10 identical ones.
Okay,
Right.
thank you for that part. You answered the second phase of my first question when you assured me that you're going to have a similar vessel on the Sound of Barra. Could you say anything about what we could expect as regards Castleby Pier and for the future plans as regards?
Ian, I think Kevin's going to talk of infrastructure after that. So we want this session
Okay, so
on vessel.
sorry.
We'll allow you
So-
back in afterwards. Don't worry about it.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't sure where you were at in the meeting since I was missing
Okay.
for a short time.
You
My
won't forget
apologies. My
about
apologies.
You won't forget about
Okay,
you know,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Macaulay.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to you for the presentation. We all appreciate, don't have a magic wand that could put an extra sailing or an extra ship on the Stornoway or the triangular route. My question is any work or research being done at the moment to enable you to plan to future-proof and plan for the future, in that how many people are vehicles are getting turned back, are not coming, not getting on board. We know there's vast amounts of traffic, both locally and holidaymakers who are turning back at Liverpool or not being here. And if you had a magic wand tomorrow and you got on a new ship, do you know what size of ship would facilitate even the traffic that we have just now? They're not even looking into the work that's been done, but is there any research or anything? I appreciate the new booking system isn't yours, but surely that would have been an ideal way of doing it. Thank you.
Where do I start? I don't like doing this, but this is really CMAL's responsibility. We, as a group of there's a tripartite, we do future economic modelling, but it's not science. You know, it has some science behind it, but it's not perfect. I think the only thing I can say is that the ships that we are currently building in Turkey, which will replace the Hebrides, there's two of them, and they're bigger than the Hebrides. So the economic modelling there said that there is a requirement, certainly in the summer, probably in the winter at the moment, for a two-ship service and splitting, that into two ships and not one. So, economic modelling does go on. It takes into account both freight services, tourism, the local communities and all of that good stuff. Forgotten what's the company that do it, Brian? I can't remember. You know.
Reference.
Yeah,
Is what they're called.
Yeah, reference economics. So they do work regularly for CalMac to predict the next 30 years, and the 30-year issue is because that in operation is how long the ship lasts. So ideally, when we build new ships, that you want them to last that long. But as I say, it's genuinely not a perfect science, because things can happen. There was a pandemic, and people were scared to go abroad, and the islands were flooded. How do you predict that? It's very, very difficult to do. But we'll do what we can. The one thing I would say, which is maybe not what you want to hear, but you cannot build ships for the one peak sailing of a year. It's simply not possible. You have to look at it over, a minimum of a day and probably a week. So when we look at the heat maps of what's going on, it's fairly obvious that there would be traffic turned away in the summer. But equally, I'm sure you're all aware that sometimes in the winter the ships are, like the Marie Celeste, to be perfectly frank. So you can't really build for peak capacity, because the EasyJet flight would all be A380s, wouldn't they, if you build for that one day and that one flight. So that really can't happen.
Unless you have two.
Sorry?
Unless you have two ships on the Lewis route.
Yes, yeah, and as I say, I mean, it's not that you can't have two ships on the Lewis route. You know, we've had them before, as you're aware. I've had this discussion with Eilean, but you know, it's a little bit of corporate history, I guess. But the only ship on the CalMac fleet that was not owned when I arrived in the business was the Loch Seaforth, and the Loch Seaforth was prior to it being contracted. It was after the economic crash, and Scotland didn't even have the money to replace one ship. That ship was leased. Now, when we looked at, again, when I arrived in the business, when we looked at the economic modelling of that, it made no sense to carry it on. So we negotiated our way out of the lease, and it's now owned. But, you know, I know that there was, and it predates me to be frank, but I know there was a lot of angst and anxiety about the Seaforth. But in reality, at the time, Scotland PLC couldn't even, you know, didn't even have the capital money to replace the Seaforth, which is why it was ended up being leased and paid for by the Bank of Scotland. So it is part of the fleet now, but you know, I think it's easy to forget because it's a number of years ago. But that was the situation that we found ourselves in. And you know, people say, well, the Seaforth works hard, but it was designed to work hard. You know, and I don't think it's been the worst ship, to be honest with you. Certainly when you look at some of the others, anyway.
So there's probably a number of other moving parts just worth mentioning. So Kevin, you've mentioned the demand forecasting and the averaging around that, which is all done through CalMac. There's also the Islands Connectivity Plan, which is probably the main body of work that would deal with demand forecasting and timetabling, and indeed fares policy, because that all comes into the mix as well. How you set your fares will then drive the demand, and then from our perspective, we then look at what we need to supply and what we need to build on top of that. And part of the Islands Connectivity Plan is the requirement for needs-based assessments, which is another moving part to all of that. And they all in train at the moment through Transport Scotland. We feed into that, as does CalMac.
Okay.
I think on the issue of the meet demand, that was a big ask in terms of the new booking system. So we were all disappointed that never happened, of course. So Miss Urban Road is sitting at the back of it, arguing with many meetings about the meet demand. So, Councillor Crichton.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting hearing what Brian has seen about the commission of the Loch Seaforth when the community was calling for a two-ferry solution all those years ago, and the community were right, of course, and it would have worked. Anyway, in terms of the design of ferries and the infrastructure are inseparable, really. Why isn't there a standardised vessel design that would avoid, that could serve all routes and would avoid modification and refurbishment of all harbours and piers, which includes cost and delays replacement of ferries?
I mean, that's where effectively we're heading. You know, that's that. I can't really answer what's gone on in the past. I think I've got the answer. So what basically has happened in the past is that ferries have been, the money for ferries has been loaned to either CMAL, apply to that, to CalMac, almost one or two at a time, and that's really unhelpful, to be honest with you. Which is why we spent quite a lot of time trying to persuade the government that to have an infrastructure plan for 5 years was a lot more useful, because what that has enabled is a degree of standardisation. When we are currently, and we haven't talked about ports, but it doesn't matter whether it's ports or whether it's ships, it makes a huge sense, as you say, to standardise where you can. You can't standardise everything. You know, we have got categories of small vessels for obvious reasons, for some of the smaller routes and smaller islands. We've got bigger ones for the longer routes. My recommendation would be where we can, we standardise, because you know, as you say, it means that the interchangeability throughout the whole of Scotland would be an awful lot easier if that was the case. I can't see us actually getting there because there are some routes that, you know, you're going to have specialist ships. So if I give you one silly example, you know, you wouldn't want a ship that could take 100 cars going to Comhairle. We've got a small vessel that takes 12 people in one car because there's only 32 people on the island. You know, equally, you wouldn't want something like that, 20 of them going across the Minch, you know. So there's always going to be some outliers for sure. So one probably best example is the Loch Nevis that operates at Malig. You know, those go to the 4 small isles, and you know that will always be a bespoke ship because it has to be. But generally, the replacement for a Clansman and the Hebrides is likely to be exactly the same as we've got building in Comhairle at the moment as an example. So that gives you that example. In terms of interoperability, the more ships you have of the same, that means that the inventory and the sort of the tied up costs in warehouses and stuff like that reduces dramatically, because at the moment, with all the ships being different, you know, you've got to have different spares for every single ship. So what we're trying to do at the moment is to make sure that we are where we can, having that, you know, having that commonality between ships. It also makes crewing a hell of a lot easier as well, because one crew can go from one ship to another. And going back in history a little bit, going back to the sort of, you can have maybe once every 2 or 3 years, you can have money for 1 or 2 ships. On the face of it, it sounds great, but the change in rules and regulations internationally and dictated by the MCA, if you do it in that way, it really leads you very, very quickly to having everything being different. Because if you have a 5-year gap between, say, a ship that's built today and something that is built for 5 years hence, the rules would have probably changed, and that leads you very, very quickly to having a different ship. And it's just massively unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. So I think that, you know, we're alert to it, and we will do what we can. You know, again, the small vessel replacement program is another one. There will be 7 that are virtually identical. They won't be totally, because my own Fianfort needs a slightly different type of vessel to the others. But, you know, that is having 7, which will have all the same machinery. They'll have the same bridge layout. They'll have exactly the same. We'll do what we can to actually make the next 3 exactly the same in terms of machinery, but they will look different. So we're trying to aggregate stuff, but you can't do that unless you get the government to give you vast sums of money to achieve it. That's
Pretty much, yeah. Can I have just very briefly, Chairman? What is the resistance to catamarans?
There isn't any. It's true. Personally, I've been on a lot of catamarans, and they are good, but they tend to be better in, let's call it, less climatic conditions. So they aren't as resilient in the winter. I think it's the best way to put it.
Okay, can I let Councillor MacDonald online now, man?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thanks again for the presentation, the discussion and the candid discussion over procurement. One of the things going forward about capacity, and particularly on the northern routes just now, will be in the next couple of years the additional freight burden that's going to be placed on the vessels due to the building of onshore and offshore wind farms going forward. I take it that this is on your radar and that discussions are going to be held between yourselves, the Port Authority, and possibly some of the contractors with regard to how that impact on capacity might affect passenger and vehicle numbers for normal use in inverted commas. I take it this is on your radar, the capacity issues that you will be facing over the next few years.
The broad answer is yes, very much so. We've got to find a solution. There's been a very similar situation. It's already happened on northern routes. We've got responsibility for the lifeline ferry services going up to Shedland, and they've had exactly the same. So there was some spare capacity on their freight ships, which has been managed relatively well, but you know, it can't be managed if you've got a completely full ship being the Seaforth. So the answer is yes. I had a meeting 2-3 weeks ago with Alex McLeod up in Stornoway. Kevin Peach, unfortunately, was taken away due to family illness, so I haven't had a chat with him about it, but Transport Scotland, ourselves, CalMac, are very aware of it. So, and a solution one way or another has to be found for sure. Because we can't have, let's call it, industrial giants completely ruining, you know, the normal flow of business to these islands.
You happy with that, Norman?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Leader?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Kevin, for the discussion so far. Thanks for lots of good points raised. The one I'm going to raise, and you've kind of touched on it, is the need for a bit of a regular drumbeat of shipbuilding. It needs to be happening more and more often, so we see what's happening going forward. You mentioned 5 years, but I think it needs to be a lot longer than that. I'm sure you can do with that. Job's not easier if you're planning for the next week. But it seems what Boysdale, as far as CalMac are concerned, is the bottom lowest prioritisation when it comes to the resilience matrix. So I'm just wondering where is it set in terms of prioritisation for CMAL in terms of shipbuilding? You mentioned possibly 2026 at the end of the current programme. How far up the queue is it going to be after that?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, we have projects. We project out for 30 years, and you know, it's fair to say that, you know, I think we've all inherited, suffered from a lack of investment. The government doesn't like me saying that, but it's just patently true. You know, if you look back to year 2000, okay, I know that Glen Sands and Glen Rose are massively delayed, and I don't really want to go there because we've been here for a week. But broadly, the only major vessels you've had since the year 2000 really is 2 out of 11, and that's nearly 25 years now. So, you know, nobody can say that it's been an adequate investment pattern for sure. What we're trying to do at the moment is catch up. I would prefer personally to see a 10, 15, 20-year cross-party agreement to make sure that there is a drumbeat of ships. To be frank, there has to be, but at the moment we're trying to catch up massively, as you can probably imagine. You know, we say in Northern Europe, and it's just not Kevin saying it, but most European operators, if you spoke to the likes of DFDS and Stena, you know, but to name a few, everybody would say that in Northern Europe, really 30 years ought to be the limit. We know that we've got ships heading towards 40, the Isle of Arran is. You know, that is not optimal, and that is part of the story of the lack of resilience within the fleet, because once you go past 30, especially if you haven't had any sort of midlife extensions, and you can't do those if you've got no spare ships. So, you know, it's almost like a perfect storm. So, you know, we're catching up at the moment. I've not got that many years to go before I hopefully retire, but I would like to think we are back down at the midpoint of 15 years by the time I do retire. Probably get the bullet next week and I'll read my words, but no. So you know, that would be the desire certainly. If you believe that 30 years is the limit, and I think we persuaded government that really ought to be. You can't wind the clock back. We have got ships that are older than that, but moving forward, the recommendation was be that you don't let ships go past 30, and that very quickly leads you to a half-life of 15 years. I would like to see it around 12, to be honest with you. You know, that would, I think, make everything much more resilient than it currently is, for sure. Again, you know, as with so many things in life, it revolves around how much money you're afforded. And, you know, I've spent all my shipping life before I got here in private shipping, and, you know, you come to forums like this and you get absolutely kicked to death, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, when you're a private company and you can't persuade a bank to lend you the money, but we haven't got any means of borrowing money other than out of the capital budgets of the government. And I think everybody is seeing and hearing that, you know, the financial situation in Scotland, or even, you know, UK wide, and probably post-COVID everywhere in Europe, it's really, really difficult. But what I will say, which I think, you know, because it sounds a bit doom-laden, at the moment, Transport Scotland is going through a process of looking at every single division and every single, you know, so you've got roads, you've got rail, you've got canals, you've got everything. The only part of Transport Scotland that is not taking a haircut at the moment is ferries, which encompasses ferries and ports, really. So I think that's good, a bit of good news. I've been pushing for more money, and I think even I can admit that's probably not going to happen easily, you know, because if everyone else is crashing and burning and having, you know, road schemes cancelled and electrification of rails, you know, is delayed and stuff like that, getting hold of more money than we've currently afforded. But I mean, I think we're quite pleased that we haven't had to have those difficult conversations to say, oh, by the way, what was 700 million is now 400. We spent more than 400 anyway, so it can't get into that amount. But no, these are big numbers. They're big numbers. And I mean, if you look at the next 5 years to get where I'd like to get to, which is 26 to 31, we need another 900. So that takes us to 1.6 billion, and that will solve the problem. We haven't talked about ports yet, have we?
No. We will talk about ports after this. Convener's got a question. Or do you want to?
Yeah. I did ask for the replacement for Lottie, but what was the start in terms of the
Maybe the timeline for Lottie, assuming you get the money.
Yes, it could be next.
Yeah, I mean, there's I guess there's 3 projects which need to be brought forward really, really quickly. Lottie is the first one, the Isle of Mull replacement, whatever that looks like. And I know that you folks probably aren't that interested in it, but certainly the freighter replacements for the Northern Isles as well. So those are the 3 that are very much on the working on the principle. It might not be true, but being asked to accelerate SVRP phase 2, I'm sort of assuming that they'll find the money for that. So that you could put that in that basket at the moment, but what's the point of saying please accelerate it if there's not, you know, the government's not minded to fund it. So yeah, Lottie, Isle of Mull replacement, followed by and also not followed by, but in conjunction with the Northern Isles, which also needs a bit of love from time to time, I guess. Because I'm not very popular when I go up there and they see all the money being spent on the West Coast for sure, you know.
So, just going back to the timeline, if you get the money in 26, Lottie.
Yeah, so a Lottie replacement will take about 2.5 years to build, is the answer. But we'll keep pushing for trying to get the money before then. But as I just said, I'm not. Probably a year ago, I might have been hopeful that we would get some more money because we did persuade the government to give us the extra 115 for the 2 little milk vessels, which will be, you still haven't brought that point, have you? But no, so I mean, you know, we did manage to get more money at that point in time. I'm not very hopeful of getting additional money at the moment, I'll be honest with you. It's pointless to be saying that I'm not. That won't stop us asking, by the way, but just trying to be realistic, set expectations.
You sure it's not going to drop down the priority list against other vessels?
Not for the fight next week. No, no. I think no. I you know that's not been discussed in any respect anywhere.
Convener.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Kevin, for your first presentation. Very, very interesting, and a lot of good points raised by members in the room. But one point I'd like to ask is, you say you look ahead, 30 years for, new boats, new routes. Have you taken into consideration when you're looking ahead, when you're planning ahead, about there could be inter-island links? So a lot of the ferries routes just now might be surplus to requirements in years ahead. For example, you possibly won't need a ferry for Burnley to Leverborough, inter-island between Barra and South Hughes. If there's going to be tunnels and a lot of other areas in the network, they'll be covered by tunnels, so that there'll be very few ferry services, I would say, in 50 years' time, if the funding is found, to link up islands with mainland Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's obvious if there's other means of getting from A to B, it doesn't require a ferry, then that's fine. What I would say is the sort of planning horizon for that sort of thing, the amount of money required for that sort of stuff is enormous. It's not to be taken lightly at all. I don't want to get bogged down in detail here, but people talk about tunnels, and actually my first degree was mining and tunnelling and engineering. So I know a reasonable amount about it, and the geology of Scotland does not lend itself particularly well to tunnels. Now, it's not to say you can't have tunnels, because there's many ways of creating tunnels. You can actually dig them out, but you can also lay tunnels as well. So if you look at an example of that in Wales, Conwy, they couldn't put a tunnel in. So actually, effectively build a mobile tunnel and lay it on the seabed, and then you seal it. So there are various ways of doing it, but all I'm saying is the amount of money and the planning and the time horizon to do that is pretty long. It's 10 years to 20 years. And my view is, nobody's going to thank us, what's the best way to describe it? Living on a whim, believing in these things are going to happen, and not replacing the ferries, and then you end up with nothing. So if something's going to take 20 years to plan, building a ship now, it's going to be more than half its life, I would say, before a tunnel arrives, or a bridge, or a causeway, or whatever. So, but as I say, the geology of Scotland and most of the UK actually is extremely unhelpful. I know everybody says, well, look what they do in the Faroe Islands, but without boring you to tears, that those rocks are extremely good for tunnelling. The geology around here is really poor for tunnelling. And it's not that it can't be done, but it just escalates the costs up through the roof.
I think Pitch Links are included in the connectivity plans, isn't that right, Brian?
Part of the longer term,
Yeah.
of the Eilean connectivity plan, but bear in mind that that's probably going to be updated on an annual basis once it's on the go.
Okay.
What I would say, just to not to reiterate what Kevin said, but I don't think you can completely predict the future. We know where we are just now. Where we are just now is that we need to replace ferries, and that might 10, 20 years, when you look back, seem like a strange decision if you know what you know in 20 years' time. But who knows? We have to plan for today. make it happen.
Okay, Deputy Leader.
Yeah, just following on from what Councillor Craig was saying regarding catamarans. You know, we're hearing lack of money, and certainly the building of catamarans are much cheaper. They've proven themselves have been operating. And when we're talking about the south of Harris, for example, we're talking about building a new ferry, and it's going to be the same depth. We're seeing how many days in the year it's not going to be saving, you know, because of tidal restrictions. So there's clear opportunities for having a look at catamarans where it is suitable. And from a cost point of view, we've seen many reports coming out that catamarans been built, you know, far more vessels could have been built where they were suitable. And you're working at the moment on a programme, you know, on replacing ferries on a new computer system. But that new computer system is flawed because it doesn't give you the opportunity of how many are actually, once they say that system is full up, you can't get on. Those people go somewhere else. And many that are here at the moment, they see that a computer system saying that the ferries are full, they turn up and then probably space for 15 cars. So when are you going to get the right IT system in place to allow you to have proper forward planning on, you know, when you are full and when it's clear you aren't full? Because there must be a huge loss to Calmac as such with ferries that are running those 20 or 10 to 20 cars and your system's saying they're full up, and many people that didn't move will go on holiday somewhere else or go somewhere else.
I think the IT system is a Calmac thing.
It's nothing to do with us, unfortunately.
It's you that's planning on the system they're providing.
No, not really. I mean, yes, in the future, you know, the heat maps, as we call them, for each of the routes, you know, is born of a booking system for sure. But the new booking system is not going to be giving us any credible data, even if it was working perfectly for 5 years. So everything that we're doing is either modelled on the old system and or the economic modelling, which I explained earlier on.
Yeah, and the economic modelling takes into account a whole other number of factors. What's happening in communities over the next however many years. The consultants that do these things make a lot of phone calls and do a lot of research in order to plan out their heat maps. It's not just based on a ticketing system.
It's clear, you know, the other point, you know, on catamarans, you're looking at forward planning over the next phase of building a catamaran saddle featuring an island. So there are many in industry, many communities which say a catamaran would suit a system. And south of Harris is one, you know, where you've got a very shallow channel that could have more capacity with a catamaran and far more sailings.
I would beg to differ, but we'll be here all day on that one. You know, you can listen to all Edison until the cows come through, but they're not professionals in this industry. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and I found it quite uncomfortable added to help myself.
We'll send the answer up here for the interim to see how you like it.
Right, so can we talk briefly about infrastructure in here?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think the if I start off with obviously the sort of triangle, you'd be aware that the Target Harris was completed and opened, and I think, you know, we're very pleased with it for sure. Loch Maddie was completed as well, and that's good. We know that the link span needs to be replaced at some stage, and I think that's a conversation that you as a councillor are also having with Transport Scotland at the moment. So that is one bit of infrastructure that hasn't been done. Buig, which is again not ours, it's the Highland Council's, but that is being developed, and actually I'm hoping the monthly meetings that I'm going to for almost an eternity are being completed in October, because they're beginning to demobilise. Obviously, there was a decision, as we did in Talbot Harris, to do the terminal building after the main heavy construction had been finished. What we found with Brodick all those years ago was that mixing up heavy construction with, you know, nice buildings just simply doesn't work. It's pretty painful. So the sort of triangle as it stands from a heavy engineering berthing point of view will certainly be completely finished, including snagging, before the end of the year. The old building, this terminal building, is there. The programme at the moment for the completion of the new one is by June next year. Have to be a swap over, but when that happens, the existing old building will be basically demolished. So I think, you know, we're in a reasonably good state there. Loch Boysdale, which is obviously ours, we basically have asked Transport Scotland for the ground investigation money last month, and also the detailed design, because the two really go hand in hand. It's broadly about £5 million to do that. You could argue that we should have done it sooner, for sure, but again, unfortunately, it comes down to funding, because Loch Boysdale on the original list for funding. But we will be in a position, hopefully, to do the ground investigation sometime around Easter next year, which will lead to detailed design, and then you put a tender together, and then we go and get it. I think there's been a little bit of misunderstanding. I had a meeting with Loch Boysdale and Store Service about 3 weeks ago. I think there's been a bit of misunderstanding about Loch Boysdale. We did spend about £4 million doing redecking. We put some additional piles in to extend its life, and I think at the time we said it would be extended by 5 years. It probably should have been said that it's a minimum of 5 years. So we're not going to walk away from it and just let it collapse in a heap. Although, you know, if a ship loses control and hits it really hard, then, you know, that will be a world of grief for sure. But that can happen anywhere. So, you know, I'm not particularly concerned that Loch Boysdale's 5-year extension is a limiting factor, but we are committed to doing the replacement of that facility at Gassay, just across the water there. So hopefully we will get the money. If we get the money, we'll see rigs and all of the necessary ground investigations being done, probably in about 6 months' time. So that type of work is not really very suited to doing it in the winter, as you can probably imagine, with the way that the storms come in. So that's really a summer activity. I think Castle Bay was mentioned as well. Castle Bay is another one that's on the list. I know that the Isle of Lewis really is too big for that facility, and it always was. But our priority, if you're just looking at this particular sort of geographical area, is to get Loch Boysdale done and underway before we deal with Castle Bay. I think if you get a Clansman or a Hebrides cascading into that route, some of the problems that are experienced currently with the Isle of Lewis will go away. There is a big lump of rock right at the head of the Castle Bay. A lot of people have said, well, why don't you blow it up? Because that's what you need to do. Point number one, it's got SSEN cable running through it, so you move that out of the way, and that can be done. It's a cost. The concern is if we drill and blast that rock, we might end up collapsing the pier. and that is not going to be useful. So, so certainly Castle Bay is on the list, but in terms of this, as I say, geographical area, Loch Boysdale is our next major focal point. So,
Okay, Leader, I'm sure you've got a question.
I had 2 hours with you the other day.
Like 2 hours or something. Yeah, I think it's just reassuring to hear that in this public space. I was reassured that I am looking at the priorities and the work that's going to be happening. And the different concern locally that there's delays and things aren't moving on. So I think I just want to note it's good to hear that was there. That's potentially the next thing that's going to happen. And once we hear the announcement that the funding comes, we'll be a lot happier, a lot more reassured. So just thanks for that.
Well, I just, to put a point out, I mean, that's just part of the story. Obviously, the big money with any of these projects is the execution of actually the rebuild. And, these things are not cheap. They never were. But as I'm sure most people would realise, certainly, the costs of these projects is beginning to run away. Sure, I mean, since the crisis in the Ukraine, for instance, steel piles have gone up by 80% in cost. Cement is about 60% more expensive. So, I mean, the irony is if we could have done a lot of these projects 3 or 4 years ago, they would probably be half the cost that they're going to be. And that's, it's an undeniable fact, but it's, we just have to methodically go through every one of our ports, and we've obviously got an eye on behalf of Transport Scotland on all the ports that aren't ours as well, which is why we got involved with Loch Madding. We've been involved with other ports, I'm sure you're aware, in the past, and we're constantly asked to, let's call it, have an oversight role for anything that there is Transport Scotland's money going into.
Can you maybe explain to me, you said Loch Boysdale wasn't on the original list, and as I understand it, currently it's priority number 1. It's Eilean.
Yeah, no, when I say that, that's the infrastructure plan. So that wasn't that was one amongst a number, including, so there's Durrock, there's Armadale, there's a few that we have that were not excluded, but there was only a limited amount of money, and whether you like it or not, and you love CMAL, hate CMAL, it's our responsibility to sometimes make tough decisions as to what comes first, and that can be driven by sort of age and expiry, it can be driven by new ships. It's a whole raft of metrics that we put into it, but if you've got a limited amount of money, you've got to decide where and how to deploy it, but we'll never stop asking for more.
So it's still number 1 on the list.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if I said no, it depends on important, wouldn't it?
Have you taken note of this thing?
Yeah.
Councillor McNeill, do you want to ask your Castle Bay question now?
Yes, it was partly answered by Kevin anyway, but I've still got a wee bit more to add to it. If Loch Boysdale is number 1 on the list, where is Castle Bay on the list? And as an option, number wise.
Well, and I'm not going to say, but it's not number 2. So, no, I mean, look, we, as asset owners, of course, we want everything to be perfect, don't we? And it isn't a perfect world that we live in. And as I said earlier on, we have to make decisions. There are always worthy causes out there, if you want to put it that way. And as I said earlier on, it is our responsibility to decide where the money is deployed ultimately when we're given the money. But we're not forgetting about any of the assets. But there are other places that aren't the Outer Hebrides, which equally are pretty life expired as well. So I'm not going to run through them for sure, but we're not particularly worried about Castle Bay at the moment. We've got greater worries in other areas, so it's not number 2. Before this thing keeps asking me repeatedly.
Right, Ian, it's not.
Okay, and
So then ask me.
sorry, you said.
It's not number 2.
So yes, I know. So it's number 3 then. I'll take it. And if has there been any thought given, a serious thought given to relocating the position of the pier in Castle Bay, taking into mind the problems around the rock and the cable and the current condition of the pier? Would it not be just as easy to, you know, kind of look at this as a new build, or is that far too expensive? And
No, look, nothing's off the table. Nothing's on the table, I think, is the best description. So when we're looking at these things, you've got a whole raft of, let's call it, compromises. So as an example, you know, if you look at going back to the Boysdale example, you know, and Brodick actually is another example where, you know, we decided that we would move, you know, in a geographical sense, exactly where the pier is and all the rest of it. And part of that is driven by, you know, believing that we either can or we can't successfully rebuild on its current footprint. And certainly at Loch Boysdale, we don't think we can. We did manage to do it at Tarbert Harris without missing a sort of a hiccup, but there wasn't a hiccup in apart from when the pilot machine fell in the water. But I think that was a half a day's relocation. But, you know, ultimately, from an engineering point of view, we have to look at where is the best place, but also what you don't want. So let's just say Gassay wasn't there and there was no other option. Actually demolishing a pier will take probably 9 months, and rebuilding it will take between 18 months and 2 years. And there's no appetite, I'm sure, to close a Loch Boysdale for 3 years. So, so we have to look at all these things in the round. Sometimes you can keep a credible service going around the rebuild, and sometimes you can't. And it's really, really difficult, to be perfectly frank, you know, making that judgment at the end of the day. Again, you know, we managed it at Lochmaddy, but it wasn't managed at Uig as an example, because there were the 2 outages that we were aware of. So, you know, but the ideal scenario, whether it stays where it is or whether it's relocated in some close proximity, part of the mixture of decisions is whether you can run a service while you're doing either of those. Obviously, you can run a service if it's in a different geographical location, because you're not, you know, disrupting the existing. But we haven't got to the stage of really knowing whether we could rebuild with that pier being operational, because it's pretty critical.
I think it would be useful to have a meeting in Barnet at some point in the future as well. See, everywhere else apart from, but he keeps reminding me of that. Ian?
thank you, Chair. You've covered everything else I was going to say. Very well. Thank you, Kevin, for turning up. And enjoy yourselves.
Make sure I don't come for another 5 years then.
Right, anybody else? Donald?
Thank you, Chair. Turning away from infrastructure and on to board governance. What are your plans to increase Eilean representation on your board? It's good to see Mr. McLean, your sole representative on the board as far as I'm aware. What are your plans to increase board representation to bring Eilean experience and knowledge to your deliberations?
think murder is more than enough personally. No. To be honest with you, I can't answer that question because I'm not involved in it. I'm the chief executive. The murder will be able to back this up, but the process of appointing non-exec directors and the chair is nothing to do with the executive team whatsoever. It's a Transport Scotland decision ultimately. So our chair ordinarily is represented on an interview panel, but it's one of 4 people. There's usually some senior person from Transport Scotland. There's somebody from public appointments, and there's, I think, Malcolm, you've been on the panels before now, haven't you? I think. Yeah. So there's usually an independent as well. I think there's a few things that I might say which might be helpful or not helpful, but we don't always get that sort of diversity from either islands or male, female, or white. It doesn't always fall naturally into that. I mean, I can't really say any more than that, but I don't mind who's on the board as long as they have got something positive to bring. And as it stands, as I say, I can't see a situation where any of the executive team, myself or Brian, the senior management team, or the directors, the executive directors, we have no involvement in any of that. So I'm not being evasive, but I don't know is the answer.
Maybe you don't have that more in the recruitment process, but surely you would welcome that expertise and knowledge and local knowledge to your deliberations, to informing you of what's happening on the ground across the islands.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think that, as I said, what we need as an executive team is people with, the relevant skills and experiences, and if they can come from the islands, that's absolutely fine. But sometimes they can't, I guess. And we don't, to my knowledge, and again, I don't know this, but we obviously, when we go out for non-exec directors, there is a discussion, I guess, just in a broad sense. But actually getting people to apply from islands is sometimes not that easy. I don't know what, I mean, I don't know what the split is from, going out advertising for a role. If you get 40 people apply, how many are from the islands? I just don't know. But it's certainly not exclusively islanders for sure. So don't know. I can't really answer the question.
There's 2 slots at the moment, and I believe recommendations are sitting with the secretary. And I certainly know.
I hope you've applied, Joe. I hope you've applied for one.
No, I haven't. But I know one person from the island who did, but did get as far as interview, but not going to be appointed. So, and I've been to Kevin's ear with this many, many times. So I'm glad it's now stated publicly that it's very positive for him to align us on the board. Thank you for that, Kevin.
Sorry, I didn't pick that up.
I said one.
No, man.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair, for letting me in. I think the comment, not necessarily from the Isles, won't exactly go down well with the interpretation of ferries equals Isles. I think that's pretty much a given. The fact that you don't think enough people with the necessary skills are applying, well, that's something we need to address. But at a minimum, I think the government needs to recognise the fact that the chairs of the transportation committees of all of the island councils affected by the Caledonia, McBrain and Comhairle, at a minimum, they need to be on that board. That needs to be a given. I mean, I don't understand how that can't be seen as a very necessary part of making a board that is actually representational and accountable. I mean, that's 3 sports for you, 4 sports. I don't know how many we're talking about here, but certainly there are enough skills on the islands without Danish jewelers and folk from Kent and whoever else is on the board that have never even been on a ferry in their lives. I think that slaps people in the face as absolutely unrepresentational. I think anybody looking from outside can see that, and particularly folk looking at it from the inside can see that. We need to cast the net within our islands and not just look for quango merchants, because that's what's filling these sports. People who are just interested in filling sports and many quangos and directorships who have absolutely no interest in the Isles, but are very interested in being on a quango. And we need to address that very quickly.
Kevin, do you want to respond to that? Chairs of transportation from various islands, you would find it very helpful, I'm sure.
Where do you start with this? We have debated it. I mean, a lot, myself and Eilean, and the one thing I would say, which is that you stated, which is wrong, certainly from a CMAR perspective, and I know that there's been an awful lot of narrative about CalMac, but from a CMAR perspective, we absolutely make sure that people do get out and about, and we do get our non-exec directors, and again, Murdo can vouch for this. It happens that there is an actual obligation anyway through something called the Port Marine Safety Code for our directors to travel on ferries. Well, that is not the Port Marine Safety Code, but the actual facilities themselves. So if I give you an example, I mean, we were here last year, but this year our directors have been to Guruk, Queens Bay, Ardrossan, which isn't ours, Brodick, which is ours, Lacranza, which is ours, Canaig, which is ours, or Eilean, which is ours, or Kent Craig, which is ours, or Asgate, which isn't ours, and half a dozen vessels as well to boot. So to say that people don't have an interest from a CMAR perspective, I'm not talking about CalMac here, it's an incorrect statement, because that happens annually, and I could run through, that continuously since CMAR's existed, apart from 1 year, which was a COVID year when we weren't allowed to do it, but we had to get a formal dispensation from effectively the MCA, which runs the Port Marine Safety Code obligations, to explain why we weren't able to, and it was fairly obvious why we weren't able to in that given year. But certainly from a CMAR perspective, directors do get out and about, and we do meet people, including here. So I don't know, Murdo, I know you're in the crowd, but yeah, I mean, what I've said is true.
Yes, I agree. I would also say that my experience is that we, as a non-exec, I'm encouraged to go out to other ports, even when we're not out as a board as such, which is different. That's been my experience. As for the appointments, as Kevin has pointed out, it is ultimately for the Minister and the following due public process. That's for you to be professional in other places rather than CMAR.
And I did meet the Glencoe murder last week. Convener, could you?
No, it's just trying to get more on the mic, because the people online wouldn't have been hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good to see that Glen Sumner's family starting his trials and that. And just to confirm that there are no more plans for LNG ferries after these two. I was at a conference last year, I think you were speaking at it on renewables, and the ferries and the plans for renewables didn't include LNG.
No, I think, yeah. No, I mean, I think LNG was always seen as a transition fuel. It was never seen as the ultimate, the sort of goal to get to net zero. LNG itself has a part to play for sure, and at that point in time, it's a bit unfortunate that the ships have taken 9 years to arrive, or at least one of them. to say the least. But LNG at the time was seen by many countries and many ferry companies as being the way forward as a transition. Just to put numbers over, you know, you've got component parts of fuel. The carbon footprint of LNG is a 23% reduction on normal gas oil. The nitrous oxides, the sulfur oxides, the particulates are non-existent. So it is part of the mix, but 23% is not zero. You know, a reduction of 23% still means that you got 77%, you know, carbon footprint with it. There isn't an easy way forward at the moment for big ships. So the small vessel replacement program, those vessels will be completely battery operated. You'll probably recall the Halleck, the Lochinvar and the Katrina, when they were built, the weight of the batteries, the energy density, the chemistry of the batteries, which is all geeky stuff, meant that you would, if you wanted to operate those ships on electricity all day, we'd have ended up being able to carry 3 cars, you know, which isn't much use to anybody. And then that's the reason that those particular vessels had the battery capacity for between 25% and 33% of the day, and the rest of it was on traditional marine gas oil. The new vessels will be 100%, and that's because 12, 13 years hence, the energy density of the battery combined with less weight in the battery and just better battery chemistry in terms of longevity and ability to charge it means that we can achieve that now for small vessels. Where it's heading for big vessels, you know, people say, well, there are big vessels out there which are going to be 100%, you know, carbon free. I'm afraid to say it's simply not true at the moment. There's one being built right next door to us in Comhairle, which is Scanlines, and you know that is being badged as, you know, carbon free. It's nowhere near carbon free. It'll be carbon free for an hour out into the port, and when it's in the port, and then when it leaves, then it goes to traditional diesel. Where the industry is heading and looking at the moment, hydrogen is an option, but it's a really difficult gas to deal with. You've got e-methanol, which is an option. You've got ammonia, which is an option, and you've got what we call molten salt reactors. For anybody else in this world, that's nuclear. Okay, so you hear that word, that is a nuclear ship. So those are the sort of directions that we're heading, and none of them are particularly easy. Even if you get to a stage where, which we have done, to say a small ferry could be hydrogen driven, there is no supply chain for hydrogen out there. There's no supply chain for e-methanol. There's no supply chain for ammonia either. So what we're doing with the big ships now, going back to your core question, is that we are leaving enough space to retrofit zero emission technology when it comes along. So I think I mentioned earlier on that ordinarily my recommendation would be professionally that all these ships, if they're going to last 30 years and they're going to remain completely resilient up until that 30-year mark, really sometime between year 13 and 17, they need to be taken out for a few months and they need to be given, you know, a good scrub up, for lack of a better word. I think in the future, instead of doing that, and that hasn't been done in Scotland, by the way, but that's what a lot of countries do. It's certainly what I've done in the rest of my career. But all of the ships that we're building at the moment have some quite large void spaces underneath, ready for, you know, the introduction of zero carbon technology in terms of propulsion. But at the moment, nobody has really got the answer. And I always describe it really as the situation. It's a bit like, for those who are old enough, you know, the old Betamax versus VHS story. You know, you're almost gambling on coming to fruition. And to be frank, there was a gamble with LNG. I mean, if you look back in history, back to say 2012, 13, there were 3 planning permissions for bulk LNG storage in Scotland, and none of them have happened. And, you know, I guess the embarrassment, if you want to put it that way, is that there's only one place in the UK, even today after 20 years, that you can actually load from the bulk LNG into a road tanker, and the road tanker then has to travel. And that's down on the Isle of Grain in Kent. You know, so, you know, when I'm saying there's carbon reduction, that then becomes a little bit offset by the fact that you're having to drag it 400 miles. You know, it's not great. But again, at the time, there was I won't call it a gamble, but there was a view, I think, and as I say, it predates me, that at least one of these 3 planning permissions would have LNG bulk storage in Scotland, and it just didn't happen. So going back to your core question, at the moment, the answer is we're building ships to be as efficient as they can be hydrodynamically. We've got battery technology on the big ones as well. We're going to plug them in overnight so that you don't burn any diesel overnight. All of that stuff's happening. That will reduce the carbon footprint of the Forth and Chenley by about 40%. That's what we're doing. But there are some big spaces in those ships that if somebody says bingo, you know, hydrogen is the future or ammonia is the future, we've got the ability to take them out of service and retrofit them sometime during their 30-year life. So,
yeah, briefly, because
Very briefly, yeah. But just confirm that there will be no more experimenting, and obviously we've spoken about the costs, and at the moment we are 300 million over cost on what is effectively a failed experiment. Can we get a guarantee from yourselves that in the future for the ships being built, we will only be going for proven technology, because this is public money, this is taking our communities. As you say, it was a gamble, didn't pay off, but at the moment we're all around here, we've been talking about projects that would have benefited from that 300 million, rather than going for something that was just experimental. And as you say, it's not really going to prove how much of a saving, and certainly the carbon footprint from Brodick to, well, it's going to be true because it won't be a thrust and it won't fit. It won't be that huge either.
yes or no will do.
So I will disagree with one aspect of what you've said. LNG dual fuel technology is completely proven. There are hundreds and hundreds of ships. Wärtsilä, that have provided the engines, have provided 4,000 engines dual fuel into the market. So it isn't unproven technology.
It just hasn't been built in the UK before we went for it.
Well, that's fine, but it's an international market. People know how to build these things. So I don't see that being the problem. The problem is that particular owner at that particular time messed it up from the outset. And I won't say any more, but that is where that amount of money has come from. It is not unproven technology.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. We're at 10 times longer than any other guest presenters. So that shows the interest in the discussion itself and members. Which particular issue. I certainly hope you don't get the bullet anyway, Kevin. Who's going to answer my phone calls at 10 o'clock on Saturday night? But anyway, I appreciate yourself and Brian coming here to the committee. No doubt further along the line we'll go back to it again. Obviously a date for us to
Yeah, we'll sort that out in the near future.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. But a bit to catch, I know. And thanks very much.
Okay, well, thank you for having us, and if you invite us back again, then
yeah,
I'll always just ask.
But we'll leave you to BBC or they want to interview them for Kevin, so be careful what you say.
But I defer to our gallant speaking either, I think.
I think the rest of the meeting.
Right, okay.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Right, if we can move to item 4, which is designated persons report. The following item is for consideration by the committee which rolls Harbour Board. We will consider the report in public, but please note that the contents of the appendix have been marked as table and should not be discussed in details once we are excited. We will take the appendix at the end of the meeting. Need it. You're on home territory, so
Next year, it can be a slot item as the last one. Best. Yeah, just a couple of things we want to highlight on the report. Is number one takeaway would be that DP has said that we've remained compliant with what we've received. And from this report, you see that he's visited Breivik and Meavik. Details are within the report, and as Jira said, if there's any questions in regards to that part of it, then you can take it in private at the end. DP, the designated person, met with myself, the chair, and chief officer in regards to the report just prior to coming to committee, and it was agreed to that report that one of his recommendations and one of the medium risk shortfalls was that there be bylaws put in place, or that there are no bylaws in place. I think it was agreed at that meeting that the issuing of bylaws does not substantially impact the safety of marine operations and navigation, and that we should not issue them until there's a clear nationwide policy position. And it's one of the recommendations that are there. I think just if you were going to be putting bylaws in place, it might be to govern roads, like traffic and stuff like that, which, yeah, it's fine in a big major port where there's lots of traffic, but it doesn't really impact us. And the other thing is that it's the management of these things. These are unmanned facilities, so it would be very difficult to to regulate anything that was in the bylaws. Happy to take any questions on this.
any questions for Pena on this report? Okay.
Just the one question, in relation to costs of, the recommendations that he does make and things that need to be done moving forward on a number of areas that he has visited. When will we have costings as a harbour board on making sure that those are recommendations it does make are enacted on, and clearly from a cost point of view, we're the harbour authority for all those sites, so we have to make sure that there is the necessary budget in place for making sure that we're compliant with all the recommendations that can consider with, particularly from looking to various issues on health and safety and various other things we've expected to. So from a cost point of view, it's far more than your budget. It is allocated to that. But moving forward, we are the harbour authority for those, and we need to identify where a budget will come from.
Is an easy question for you, Pena?
Thank you for that. Yeah. In terms of cost, or even if you go back to the recommendations that are within the report, this one I've kind of tailored more to what the latest report was. But as for the last number of years, we come back with the actions against his recommendations, and we put in all the actions as they go forward. In cost, I think yourselves that operating side of things is there's reducing budgets throughout the colony, so it is harder. So, and if you want a report directly putting all the costs against it, then maybe that's something we can do into the future.
Yeah, it's a very good question. One of the things we're doing just now is the designated person will be coming up with various recommendations. Now, they can vary from things that we would class as very urgent, which we would do right away, to things that are maybe desirable in some ports. So what we need to have is a complete picture across the estate to say, okay, these are the priorities, these are the things that we would recommend that we as a harbour board should be doing, and we as a Comhairle should be looking. Part of an asset management plan for Pearson Harbour is something that we are working on, and I would hope that sometime next year we've been in a position, once we get these reports in, that we'll start collating that. Now, many of us assets are so across the Western Isles which are not very well used. They're clearly in condition, and we need to make some difficult decisions over the years and how we manage these. We are just now having discussions on some of our assets which communities may be interested in. But we find that interest is more like we're happy to keep, the council will keep on paying for it. So I think that as a management plan, an investment plan for Pearson Harbour will appear with you sometime next year. That helps.
Next year, then. Patience is everything.
Well, what I'm looking at is we are the Harbour Authority.
Yeah.
We have to be sure that those assets that we do have, whether the community take them or not, we're responsible for them when at the current moment in time. And as a committee, we are the Harbour Authority for that area. So we can't fudge away from the fact that they have to be maintained to a reasonable standard. And going forward, I've always said, we get Crown Estate money, it comes out to the sea, and we have those assets, and they are part of the Cornwall asset register as such. And as we move forward next year, I think some action needs to be taken on, that some of that money should be invested in the council's assets.
I think something else we may need to consider as well, some of these difficult questions could be that some of the facilities may have to close. But again, I think that will have to come from yourselves as a harbour board with that kind of recommendation. We have quite a number. Kenny will rattle off the number of assets we have across the Western Isles. Some of them are historical, not really used for the fishing practices, but they were used. Some are now being used more for recreation. But we need to have that in front of us. But we need to look at utilisation, we need to look at condition and bring these reports back to you. But they might be difficult decisions on actually retaining some of these.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So the report states the Breivik Harbour Users Group have made a fantastic job in maintaining the harbour in partnership with ourselves as a harbour board, and that has been because of Crown Estate funding that's been used to utilise that group again, revitalise that group to maintain. But it's important that it is a partnership, and that these community group or user groups shouldn't be a substitute for ourselves and our responsibilities around the harbour.
No. Want to come back to?
Yeah, just response to that. You're absolutely right. So where the communities do get involved with us in partnership is where you see the greatest kind of benefits come in. And have Braidwood as an example, Leverport as another example, Eilean's another example. They get investment comes in not just from the community through the Crown Estate, but the council then is able to kind of lever other kind of funds in as well. So partnership working is definitely the best benefit that's found.
Yes. The members agree the recommendations. Point one, yes. We move on to Gordon's report, as in place. Additional clear correctly. This report seeks approval to implement permanent prohibition of entry traffic regulation order to a safe place in Eilean Road. Government claims it will speak to report and answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair. We may be aware that there has been quite a bit of fear around this issue. We are looking to implement a permanent traffic regulation order for the prohibition of vehicles entering from Willow Road onto a safe place. We've undertaken, we have had a temporary order in place, an experimental order. During that, we haven't seen any detrimental effects on other roads. We do have an objection. I've appended the details of the objection with our responses to them in the report. There may be some times where the council may want to move to a formal hearing to deal with that objection. The recommendations of the report are that we don't proceed to a formal hearing in relation to the objection raised, and an agreement of not going to the hearing, that we proceed with replacing the experimental traffic order with a permanent traffic regulation order. We have undertaken some works in the area as well. We've done some work to make the pedestrian safety better coming out of the castle grounds in that location, and also put a speed up that on Willow Road as well. Willow Road, our safe place, will also be covered with a temporary traffic order looking to implement sternly for 20 miles an hour. So, I'm happy to question from you.
Okay, Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman. It's very useful for the report. There is signage there for the prohibition, the entry, but having spoken to a few residents, there's still a number of cars going through, maybe less than was before, but there's still cars going through. And I don't think they're realising, I know that they should, that the signage is appropriate, but they're interpreting it as a prohibited entry. And I know hopefully that there will be a press statement to go out after this meeting if the recommendations are agreed, just to make sure the public know that the prohibited entry except for access. And maybe because of the permanent implementation, it will lessen the cars going through, and it's now being able to be enforced by the police if it's permanent. But I wondered if there was any scope for putting a narrative sign up at the point so that people are aware that there's no entry except for access. Just to ensure that.
You mean a narrative sign as opposed to
they've got that already, but yeah. Isn't it because we're almost there. It's been a long journey to get to this point. The residents have been concerned for a while. The sign is, they should be interpreted as a no entry except for access, but it's a round sign with a bike and a car on it, and I don't think that actually would there be a chance of people having a visual sign up, even for an interim period. Thanks very much, Alan.
We can have a look at that in some way, but when you come along the it's nearly verified signage. So the more signage should be done there, people just pay attention. No, but I think the most appropriate thing we can do, I'm happy to look at that to see if there's any merit in doing it. But I think the most appropriate thing to do is once the order is permanent, we'll go through a period of enforcement with Police Scotland, and we can advertise that Police Scotland will be enforcing this, and then that may get the message across.
What about Gordon's request for press after this meeting?
Well, I think that's maybe more appropriate once the legal aspects of the traffic order have come through. So once it's actually a permanent traffic regulation order, then we're starting enforcement. I don't think it actually starts when this is approved. Perhaps some Eilean can help me out on that.
Yes, I need to check the regs, but I think like sign the order. Yes, certainly. Yeah.
You happy with that, Gordon?
Yes, so is it a case of how long is a piece of string, how long does that take? And the other thing is there a time in the future where we can assess how effective it is?
How long is a piece of string?
The piece of string so far has been quite long. With this, so this is if these recommendations are approved today, you're looking at quite an matrix way forward. We've been trying to deal with these objections for a while. That's why it's come to this stage now. We're looking to proceed on the basis that we don't go to a formal hearing, and if this committee agrees to go for the permanent order, we can make that reasonably. Just now we're doing some assessment throughout Stornoway. See the implementation of temporary traffic order for 21 and elements. So in this area, we will say there'll some traffic survey work done beforehand, and then after it's implemented, assess the impact. So that can go on.
It's a tiny piece of string. Councillor McSween.
And then I'm on the committee. Just you just mentioned there, Paul, the other speed limits. So my understanding was that there has been a moratorium on taking speed limits. You'll have received a petition from our ward in regards to Godson. So what we can say to people is that it's not possible just now, but are things like this possible just now?
I know this is not part of the report.
Yeah, I know.
He's putting his.
I'm pretty by that. Yes.
I'm happy since we're in house, so people consider it. I know I can't remember it's probably 2 years ago since we put a report to the committee saying that we were going to wait for Transport Scotland to do a national review of speed limits prior to us then doing a local review of speed limits. I'm not seeing timescales coming forward on that, and national government have been more focusing on 20 mile an hour zones rather than looking at a national speed limit now. What I'm prepared to do though is to start looking at this prior to this where before, where people have been asking to review speed limits. We would look to do it more on a zonal basis, because to look at individual areas is quite difficult, and it's difficult to get a consistency across the islands. So I would say probably within, maybe by next February, we'll look at compiling a priority list of where people have asked us, but not even that. There's areas that we haven't been asked, and we might just want to do a review of where zones go from, say, national speed limit 60 into 40 into 70, and see how that affects our settlements now. So I would hope to have something to you in February.
She's going to be missing next year, Colin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right, do members agree the recommendations in 3.1, Ray?
So I'm not on the committee. If I remember right, there were quite a number of objections to one. Now it's down to one.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, that answers it. Thank you.
Okay, so do we agree the recommendations of 3.1?
Agree.
Yeah. Thanks for your patience in all this, Gordon. Okay, electric vehicle infrastructure charging strategy update. This report advises of the new delivery approach and funding landscape for electric vehicles. along with work undertaken to date and the proposals for further delivery. Alan will speak to the report and David MacLeod and Robin McLennan will answer difficult questions. Okay, Val.
Thank you, Chair. I think the easy part of this, just by overview, we've been working with Transport Scotland and Scottish to gradually increase the EV charging network. That's been done quite successfully to date, but there's more of a view now to have a more focused and strategic approach to the EV charging network. There has been funding available, but we're looking at the options of whether this should be publicly run network. The preference is to go for a private partnership in running such a network. It's like when you look at the fuel stations where local government don't run fuel stations. So to date, this has been run by in the main. There are one or two charge points there that have been set up by communities. So there's been quite a bit of work done. Robbie is becoming which are basically in your mind. So there are a number of things happening quite soon in terms of the charging network. One of the more imminent things is that any charger over 50 kilowatts, so a rapid charger, needs to be contactless. Now, we have 3 chargers that can't be upgraded, and there's a possibility they have to be taken out of commission in November because they're not contactless. There is a bit of discussion on just now that we may have a bit of wiggle room over that. Maybe we let David and Robbie come in. The other issue is really looking at how we expand the network. And within the report, you have seen that Robbie's looked at this principle of hubs, and Robbie can maybe answer questions on that as well. But the other thing that's happening as well is the back office, Charge Place Scotland, will be discontinued. And that'll mean that we need to look at other back office operators. So there could be quite a number of back office operators throughout Scotland, throughout Britain. So you may go to a charge point and find you need to load up an app first of all before you actually access that one. But that should be simple enough to be done. I'll stop my introduction and ramble from this just now. There's quite a lot of information in here, and members may have some more questions on where the start is going. So maybe hand it over to David and Rory if there's any questions.
Have you got any questions then on this? I did raise that the briefing on the 2 community groups in News were talking shutting down the EV chargers they have. Of course, they're costing about almost £3,000 in maintenance. That it could be under that big Parliament said we used in not. So we are dealing.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of maintenance costs, what we've done more recently is use our contractors locally to actually undertake maintenance and training through the manufacturing with Swarco. So that's reduced the time for people to go out and actually rectify any defects, and it's also reduced the costs. Historically, we've had a lot of grant funding from Transport Scotland. That grant funding is reducing dramatically over the last few years. So come December, we will need to set up new contracts again for maybe local contractors. But we have found using the local framework, the response times for rectifying any defects and the costs have dramatically reduced. We do have consultation with my colleagues in Shetland Council, Orkney Council and other neighbouring councils. We've kind of updated them in terms of that as well. A lot of local authorities have put down that all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Something else that we did last year was we had to increase our charge bid limit. And I don't know if these committee groups have actually done that. So you're looking at 79 pence a unit now, maybe?
At the moment for our 50 kilowatt chargers we're 59 pence, and for our 7 and 22 kilowatt chargers, which are the slower chargers, we're at 45 pence. However, that will have to get reviewed in the future to cover some life cycle and replacement costs for the charger.
David, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of the new regs that are coming in November, the regulations rather than Scottish Government ones, but we have suggested that it would be a bit detrimental to the use and the continual growth of electric vehicles if, because of a technicality, because we haven't got contact lists, they actually take the post away. That seems a bit counterproductive. So we have asked if we can get a bit more time to try and do this. One solution for us would be to convert them to council fleet only, but really that's a detriment to the provision of service. I think one thing that's definitely come out of all of the discussions with ourselves, Orkney, Shetland, Highland, or Gowland Butte, is that the commercial viability for the private sector to come in and take over all of our network is probably pretty low just now. It needs a bit more time before we get to the stage. So we're looking at probably having a two-phase application approach to the funding. In the first phase, we'll be looking at getting the network up to a better level so that they're all fully working, fully operational, ready to be handed over, rather than having some that are 8, 9, 10 years old.
Any questions, Leader?
Thank you, Chair. Just at 7.3 of the map with the hub locations, slightly concerned about the same thing except you covered by charger and bar. Charger and bar.
Right.
I think it's not really suitable in terms of access, so just some consideration to be given for that.
Thank you. Wants to comment on Scotland?
Yeah, in terms of the hub locations, the sites haven't been confirmed as of yet. There are feasibility works that need to be undertaken in terms of determining what the DNO or SSC or capacity is in a lot of these areas, along with telecommunication and ground investigation works. So at the moment, it's an indication of 4 hubs strategically placed across the Western Isles, but the individual locations where these will be determined by the outcomes of future survey works.
Okay, Colin, you want to go ahead?
I think the point there as well, Robbie, is we may, after the next North Use and Beckler and South Use, maybe have 2 hubs covering that location rather than the one in the Beckler, which should be.
Although the models show 4 hubs, 1 hub might have, as you say, 2 separate kind of location charging locations. So that will be further assessed when the various feasibility works are undertaken.
You'll be coming back to report on this at some point next year again, isn't it?
So I think once we have a funding allocation, and we'll come back with more detail for you. So if now we're looking at having the strategy approved, but this is generally the direction of travel, but the detail will come back with.
Thanks, Chair. I've been a rugby car and I don't tend to know much about this. And I've got no suspicion that this is happening when I'm about to say whatsoever. But is there I noticed there's 4 new spaces in the South Beach car park now where cars can go, and the other two have obviously not there anymore. Is there a danger as demand grows in that particular area that cars could be tempted just to park there all day and charge their car for half an hour and just leave their car all day? And as demand grows, these spaces can just be, or the cars automatically move as soon as they. But the fact that the charging hubs are based in the car park, which is primarily used all day, it's a danger or a concern or something that's likely to happen. It's happening now or will happen in the future.
Good point, David.
Thank you, Chair. At the moment, there's an overstay charge if you're an electric vehicle plugged into the network. So if you're charging, you've got a period of time where you can charge, and then if you overstay that, beyond that, a bit of flexibility, then there's an overstay charge. The difficulty at present is that there's very limited methods to deal with somebody who parks a petrol or diesel car in a charging bay for an electric charging point, because you don't have the details, because they haven't logged in, they aren't charging. So there is a system and an app being developed that's likely to be rolled out fairly soon, probably next year, where that can be dealt with in a slightly different way, so that it can all be done on photo recognition, automatic recognition. For the moment, that's not the case, but it's likely to come in. It's likely to come in the near future.
Ian, you want to come back?
Next year, yeah, I wasn't even thinking about non-chargeable computers. Was that something else as well? So, primarily, if an electric car is parked there, the video should be plugged in, or if it's not plugged in, it shouldn't be there.
Yes, so that's correct. I was actually just looking at something very recent, so it probably would be of interest to shop owners like yourself. There has been a fairly significant increase in business and custom round about where hubs are developed for EV charging. So I think there is something that will have another year impact on the local area.
You did own charging, please. Anybody else? Ray?
Thank you. Yes, I don't have an electric car, so I'm with cleaning the whole thing, but anyway, what I was going to say was, yeah, there are on the web, I don't notice this is going to change. There are two fast charge and slow charge, and I think one was more expensive because somebody was distressed and got in touch with me to say that getting charged £6 instead of £5. But when I inquired at the time, council, and that they were on the wrong charge, I think. So we left it longer than you should have done the fast charge. So will this be out? Will this be avoided in the sense of they don't go in charge of?
So just that comes from that question as well. So there is an overstay charge of £30 if you don't leave the charge point within a certain time of charge. I think there's a case here for when somebody buys a vehicle to actually be told how you actually manage this. Each charge point that you go to will have an identification number on it, and there's a way of contacting charge with Scotland. So the tariffs are all available for you there. There is probably some training required, so when you actually buy your vehicle from the retailer manufacturer, but there should be a bit more instruction, I think, on what to do to charge. and what the options are going to be for how you actually pay the tariffs. I think this particular instance, I know I've re-communicated on it, and there is clear instruction on the charge points themselves, but there's maybe a bit of new technology, or maybe not everybody. Somebody could leave a guide for their vehicle thinking, well, okay, where you plug this in. So there's maybe a bit more training that could be done there at source. I don't know if Robbie can. Robbie?
Thanks. Yes, each of the charge posts has a label on them notifying if there's a charge applied to them. It also highlights with the 50 kilowatt chargers, the rapid chargers, that there's overstay charges. That's on the council website as well, but it's also on various apps that people use. So there's a number of opportunities for the user to be made aware that there is either tariff charges, what these tariff charges are, and if there's overstay charges applied. I think it's a very good point that Callum raised. It's an element of user responsibility, and sometimes when people purchase electric vehicles for the first time, there is that gap there. But we do try and advertise it as much as possible on the post, on our website, and nationally on the various apps that's out there. They will notify users of charges applied.
I've had only using for a while, and people still put the wrong one.
Johnny, did you? That's just what I was going to say. Also,
I'm also breaking mine.
You don't want to pay for that, but at least give you 0 for. Okay. That was indication. Anybody else? No, okay. The members agreed recommendation of people. Okay, item 7 and 8 will be taken at 5 at the end of the meeting, so we will move to item 9, reports outstanding, and this is noting.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll now conclude the meeting and go into private to consider item 7B. The relevant officers and members of the committee should and ask all other participants to please